April 10th, 1986. Rural West Haven, Texas, a town stitched together by open fields, old barns, and one long, dusty highway. It was the kind of place where everyone knew the sound of everyone else's car engine, and where silence felt heavier than night. That Friday morning, 15 middle school students boarded Bus 17 for their annual geology field trip. The route, 42 miles north to the Keegan Ridge Formation, a shallow canyon lined with red rock and promise. It was supposed to be a simple day out. Picnic lunches, field notebooks, Polaroids for the yearbook. At 7:46 a.m, driver Earl Denton, a quiet man with 20 years on the job, checked his mirrors and waved to the principal. The last words anyone heard from him crackled through the radio. Bus 17 leaving campus. Then, nothing. By mid-morning, clouds rolled in from the west, thick, low, and silver. The wind turned cold. When noon arrived and the class hadn't reached the park rangers at Keegan Ridge, the school office dialed the sheriff's line. It was a call no one thought would matter. At first, dispatch treated it like a delay, a flat tire, maybe a detour. But by 4 p.m, parents began gathering in the cafeteria. Mothers held jackets, fathers stared at the clock. The intercom kept repeating, "We're still waiting for confirmation." At 5:32 p.m, a search alert was issued. 2 patrol cars drove the length of Highway 49. No skid marks, no debris, no sign of Bus 17. Helicopters swept the tree line with infrared cameras, their spotlights cutting through mist. From above, the road looked like a single thread disappearing into woods. Sheriff Cole Merrin, only 34 then, led the operation himself. He told reporters they couldn't have vanished. Not 15 kids and a bus. But as the sun bled out behind the silos, reality began to shift. That night, neighbours lit porch lamps one by one, a chain of tiny beacons stretching across West Haven. By nightfall, every porch light in West Haven was burning. Rain began just after midnight. Volunteers fanned out across the fields, flashlights cutting cones through the dark. The sheriff's radio barked coordinates, but the static swallowed most replies. Each gust of wind sounded like a child's voice. Near mile marker 213, Deputy Frost found fresh tyre grooves veering off toward an unfinished service road, a path leading to nowhere. At the edge of that dirt track lay something small, pale and soaked, a folded sheet of paper. He lifted it under the beam of his flashlight. Ink had bled across the lines, but the heading remained clear. Permission slip, West Haven Middle School field trip. April 10th, 1986. Signed in a shaky hand, Jessica Hayes, age 12, seat number 5. That single piece of paper was the first, and for a long time the only, evidence that Bus 17 had ever existed beyond the town limits. 15 children, 1 driver, no bus, just a permission slip fluttering in the ditch beside a rain-soaked road. By dawn, search crews were called back. The storm made the fields impassable. The tyre tracks were gone. Sheriff Merrin promised to resume at sunrise, but even he knew something in the pattern didn't fit. He turned to his deputy and whispered, "If that bus went off the road, someone's hiding where?" He was right, but no one would prove it, not for another 39 years. Next. The search that swallowed a town. When fear replaces hope, and every field becomes a question mark. By morning, West Haven no longer felt like a town. It felt like a search party stretched thin across miles of wet earth. Rain drizzled through the sycamores, turning the fields into mud, coating boots and hope alike. Pickup trucks lined the road leading to the ridge, headlights cutting through the fog. Parents, farmers, and church volunteers moved in single-file lines, each carrying a flashlight that flickered like trembling fireflies against the dark. They searched for colour in a world of grey, scraps of yellow paint, a child's backpack, anything. But the fields gave nothing back. Every time someone shouted, the echo came first, and silence came after. At the community centre, maps were spread across cafeteria tables. Sheriff Colmerin leaned over them, marking grids with a black marker that squeaked against the laminated surface. His voice was low, tired, but steady. He'd promised them answers, though deep down he feared he was chasing ghosts. Cole had been sheriff for only 4 years. Before that, he'd been a deputy, the kind who still believed good work and persistence could fix anything. But now, looking at the rain streaking down the windows, he understood the cruelty of uncertainty. Missing children didn't just vanish, they erased the air around them. By noon, news crews arrived from Dallas and Houston. Reporters stood ankle-deep in mud, microphones wrapped in plastic, their voices trembling as they spoke live into the storm. One mother, face pale beneath a soaked hood, whispered into a camera, "Just bring them home." Please. Her name was Marjorie Hayes. Her daughter's permission slip was the one found in the ditch. The footage aired that evening on every local channel. It showed a town refusing to sleep. Men in ponchos combing the woods, dogs barking, flashlights sweeping the ditches. People prayed aloud. Others cursed the heavens. In West Haven, faith and fear had become the same language. By the third day, the rain stopped, but the ground was still bleeding mud. Sheriff Merrin called in help from 3 neighbouring counties. They set up a command tent near the old quarry and brought in floodlights that painted the fields white. Helicopters hovered low, their blades scattering puddles like broken glass. Then came the first clue. Thin, fragile, almost meaningless, yet enough to keep everyone moving. A tire mark near the end of an unfinished bridge west of County Road 12. The mud had hardened around it, like a wound that refused to close. Merrin stood over it, hat dripping, arms folded tight. The track looked like it belonged to a heavy vehicle, too wide for a pickup, too deep for a tractor, maybe a bus, but the bridge led nowhere. It had been abandoned mid-construction 2 years earlier, after a flood washed out the foundation. Beyond it, a steep drop led down to a narrow riverbed, now swollen and brown with runoff. Divers were called in at sunset. They slid into the murky current while spotlights swept the surface. The crowd gathered on the bank, silent except for the soft whir of generators. Mothers clutched one another's hands, holding breath between each report crackling over the sheriff's radio. Visibility 0. Silt too heavy. Going deeper. The hours dragged. Searchlights dimmed. The river gave up branches, cans, a rusted license plate, but no sign of bus 17. At midnight, a diver emerged, shaking his head. Nothing. His voice broke through the quiet like a verdict. One by one, the lights flickered off. Sheriff Merrin stared at the black water, his reflection swallowed by ripples. He hated that word. Nothing. It meant the story was still buried somewhere out there, just beyond the reach of truth. As the last truck pulled away, a deputy waded into the shallows to collect debris caught against a branch. He bent down and froze. Something glimmered faintly under the beam of his flashlight. A wristwatch. He lifted it carefully, mud slipping between his fingers. The face was cracked, the leather strap torn. The hands were stuck at 2:47. The inscription on the back was faint but legible. To Ellen, for your first year teaching, 1984. It belonged to Ellen Grady, the science teacher who had organised the field trip. Sheriff Merrin turned the watch over in his palm, the second hand frozen mid-tick, as if time itself had stopped the moment they vanished. The rain began again, soft, steady, relentless. No bus, no children, just a watch, carried downstream from nowhere. ticking toward a truth no one wanted to face. And as Merrin stood there in the dark, he whispered what everyone in West Haven was thinking, but no one dared to say aloud. If the river brought this back, what else is waiting to surface? 14 months. That's how long it took for hope to collapse into paperwork. In June of 1987, the West Haven Sheriff's Department held a brief press conference in front of the courthouse. Sheriff Cole Merrin stood behind a podium, a wall of microphones pointing at him like weapons. His face was drawn, his tone flat. After extensive investigation, he read from a prepared statement, the disappearance of Bus 17 and its 15 occupants is hereby classified as a vehicle accident with no recovery. He said the words without looking up. The cameras clicked, reporters scribbled, and the parents, those who still had the strength to attend, stood at the edge of the crowd, stunned into silence. No recovery. It was the neatest way to describe something unthinkable. Within days, the official files were stamped and sealed. The case number, WH860410, was archived in a metal cabinet, third drawer from the bottom. A clerk initialed the folder, slid it shut, and turned the key. That sound, the click of a lock, was how West Haven learned to live with ghosts. In the months that followed, the town fractured. Some families moved away, unable to stand the sound of the school bell each morning. Others stayed, clinging to routines like a form of prayer. The empty seats in the classroom were never filled. Their names stayed on the roll call longer than anyone could bear. The local paper ran an editorial calling for healing and faith, but healing never came. What came instead were whispers. At the diner, people leaned close over their coffee cups. Some said Bus 17 had driven into an abandoned mineshaft north of the quarry. Others claimed it was a cover-up, that the county had something to hide. One rumour spread like wildfire, a cult operating near the woods, old rituals, missing livestock. The sheriff's office denied everything, but rumours don't need truth to survive. They just need silence. Sheriff Merrin avoided interviews. He rarely left his office except for short drives along the same stretch of Highway 49, the one that led nowhere. Deputies said he'd park by the old bridge for hours, headlights off, just watching the water move below. When asked about it, he simply said, "Sometimes the river remembers what we don't." Inside the homes of the missing, time slowed. Bedrooms were left untouched. Report cards still pinned to corkboards. A single blue jacket hanging by the door. Every knock, every phone call after dark made hearts race again. For a second, hope felt possible. Then it wasn't. Marjorie Hayes, whose daughter Jessica had signed that permission slip, stopped answering the door altogether. She kept her porch light on every night, long after the others went dark. Neighbours said she'd been keeping notes, writing down any strange sound, any car that passed too slow after midnight. Some said she'd gone quiet because she was waiting for a call that would never come. One evening, about a year after the press conference, Marjorie walked to the small post office at the edge of town. She carried a single envelope addressed to herself. The clerk recognised her and hesitated, unsure whether to ask why. She just smiled faintly and said, "It's for later." She paid for the postage, watched the letter disappear into the sorting slot, and walked back home through the rain. The envelope sat in the post office vault for decades, sealed and forgotten. On its front, in faint blue ink, was written 5 simple words, "In case they're found." The town changed after that. The school built a memorial garden with 15 white stones. People stopped mentioning Bus 17 out loud, but it lingered in small ways. Songs the kids used to sing, a photo pinned to a bulletin board, a flash of yellow that made someone turn their head too fast. West Haven learned to move on, at least on the surface. But beneath the calm, something restless waited, because not everyone believed the story ended at the bridge. Somewhere in those sealed files, in the margins of the sheriff's notes, were details no one ever explained. An unmarked road, an unidentified vehicle sighting, a timestamp that didn't fit. And in 2025, when those files were finally unsealed, the world would learn why the truth had stayed buried for 39 years. 39 years later, West Haven looked different. Wider highways, new houses, same restless wind. But Lake Keegan hadn't changed much. It was still a quiet stretch of water held between cliffs and pine, the same lake that search teams had scanned decades ago without result. Only now, in the summer of 2025, the lake was vanishing. A record drought had burned through Texas that year. By July, the lake had dropped more than 20 feet. Shorelines cracked into strange mosaics of clay and dust. Fish lay stranded in shallow pools, the air thick with the smell of rust and heat. On the morning of July 9th, a local fisherman named Dean Heller launched his small aluminum boat into the shrinking lake. He'd fished here all his life, but that day wasn't about catching anything. It was about curiosity. The waterline had never been this low, and something about the exposed mud drew people in. Dean's sonar, an old half-working screen bolted to his boat, flickered with static. For hours it showed nothing but the jagged outlines of rock. Then, near the northern edge where the old service bridge once stood, a shape appeared. Smooth, rounded, too symmetrical to be natural. A pulse of metal. He thought it might be an old truck, maybe scrap-dumped decades ago, but the curvature was distinct, almost deliberate. He saved the image, sent it to the sheriff's office, and went home without saying much. When the file reached the county department, it landed on the desk of Detective Aria Lowe, West Haven's new cold case investigator. She'd only been in the position 6 months, transferred from Dallas after earning a reputation for solving what others abandoned. Young, precise, and quietly relentless, Aria wasn't from West Haven, but she'd grown up in a town just like it. She opened the case number on the report, WH 860410, and frowned. The digits meant nothing to her at first. Then the clerk, an older man with thin glasses, said softly, "That's bus 17. Aria paused. She'd heard rumours of the story growing up, whispered through Texas law enforcement circles like a ghost story that wouldn't fade. 15 missing students. No trace. No closure. Now, nearly 4 decades later, the drought had done what years of search teams couldn't. It had forced the lake to speak. She drove to the site that afternoon, the sky wide and pale with heat. The waterline had receded hundreds of yards from the old pier. Cracked earth spread out like an open wound. Drone operators from the state unit hovered small quadcopters over the area marked by Heller's sonar reading. On her tablet, Aria watched the live feed as the drone dipped low, the camera lens cutting through waves of rising dust. What appeared was faint at first, a subtle curve breaking the flatness of the dried mud. Then the light caught it, a flash of faded yellow beneath the cracked silt. She zoomed in, adjusting the contrast. There it was, the roof of a school bus, half buried, the metal warped and corroded, numbers faintly visible under the dirt. 17. Her heart tightened, not from excitement, but from the quiet gravity of recognition. History wasn't gone, it was waiting. Back at the sheriff's office, Aria reopened the archive folder, now relabeled File Number 2, 47-86. Dust fell from its edges as she flipped through the pages. Everything about the original report felt incomplete. The search logs, the weather data, even the statements. But one thing stood out. A fuel receipt. April 9th, 1986. A record for diesel purchased by the county's transportation department. There should have been 3 refuels that week. There were only 2. The missing log entry, dated the morning of the field trip, had been crossed out. Someone had removed a fuel purchase. Someone had tried to erase a mile of movement. Arya leaned back, the air humming with old secrets. The report claimed the bus vanished north of town, but the lake, Keegan Lake, was southwest, miles off the scheduled route. No reason a school bus would ever be there, unless it wasn't an accident. She stared again at the drone footage on her monitor, fingers resting on the edge of the screen. The sun reflected off the roof of Bus 17 like an open eye. For 39 years, West Haven had lived with silence. Now the ground itself was breaking that silence apart. The sheriff knocked on her door before leaving for the evening. "You're reopening it?" he asked. Arya didn't look up from the photos. "I'm not reopening it," she said quietly. "It just reopened itself." Outside, the horizon burned orange as the last light hit the drained lake bed. The shape beneath the earth waited, unchanged, patient, ready to tell its story. And as the first excavation lights flickered on, a chill wind rose through the cracks of the lake, carrying the faintest echo of children's laughter, like memory carried on dust. The past was no longer buried. By dawn, the excavation site looked like something from another world. Floodlights stood in the cracked basin of Lake Keegan, cutting through layers of dust and steam. Excavators hummed low, their metal arms brushing away decades of silence. Every scoop of earth released a ghost of diesel and mud. Detective Arya Lowe stood at the edge of the pit, clipboard in hand, her boots sinking slightly into the clay. Below her, the roof of Bus 17 emerged fully for the first time in 39 years. Faded yellow paint, dulled to ochre, rust climbing like veins along its body. On the side panel, barely visible through the corrosion, the words West Haven County Schools still clung to the metal like a scar. The team worked slowly. They didn't know if they were unearthing evidence or a grave. By mid-morning, the outline of the vehicle was clear. The front windows were shattered inward, glass embedded deep in the dust. The emergency door at the back had been jammed shut from the outside with a bent iron bar, an old road barricade twisted and rusted, no sign of movement within. When they finally pried open the main door, a hiss escaped, like air releasing from an old wound. The smell hit first, stale fabric, oil, and time. Arya stepped forward with a flashlight, her beams slicing through the gloom. Inside, the seats were still arranged in 2 perfect rows, decayed, torn, eaten by mould, but intact. Sunlight slanted through the broken windows, illuminating clouds of drifting dust. The interior was eerily preserved, frozen at the moment it had disappeared. And then she saw them. 15 backpacks, lined neatly in the aisle, each still bearing the faded patches and keychains of children who'd never come home. Some had names barely legible under grime: Tina H., Caleb R., and Megan. A crayon drawing of mountains still clung to one, edges stiff with age. It didn't feel like evidence, it felt like intrusion. Arya paused, the hum of generators fading behind her. For a long time, she just stood there, taking in the weight of silence. Then her light caught something near the driver's mirror. Pinned there, with a rusted thumbtack, was a Polaroid photograph. 15 smiling faces and 1 teacher, posing in front of the same bus, the morning of the trip. Their excitement looked eternal, untouched by what was to come. But the photo itself told another story. The edges curled, the image slightly overexposed, as if time itself had tried to erase it. She took a slow breath. "Get this to the lab," she murmured, though her voice barely reached above the hum of machinery. The forensic team moved in next, cataloguing every inch of the bus. Cameras clicked softly, gloves brushed over corroded metal, evidence bags sealed with care. Under one seat they found a water bottle. Under another, a compact mirror engraved with initials. Each discovery added to the silent chorus of what had been left behind. Arya leaned over a technician kneeling near the centre aisle. "Anything unusual?" The man hesitated. "Seat 9, he said. You'll want to see this. Beneath the cracked vinyl of seat 9, half buried in mud, something metallic caught the light. He brushed the dirt away slowly. A tape recorder, its plastic casing brittle, buttons corroded but intact. An old model, 1970s, maybe early 80s. The label on the back read, "Property of West Haven Middle School." Aria crouched beside him, eyes narrowing. Could it still play? Maybe, if the tape inside survived. She reached out and lifted it herself, careful not to disturb the evidence markings. The recorder was heavier than she expected, solid, almost deliberate. A relic from another world. She could feel the faint rattle of a cassette inside. Outside the bus, the wind picked up, carrying dust across the lake bed. The sky had turned grey, clouds gathering like witnesses. She stared at the recorder for a long time before finally whispering, "This thing's been waiting." That night, in the temporary field office overlooking the pit, Aria placed the recorder on a table, surrounded by evidence bags and photographs. Around her, monitors flickered with live footage from the site, drone lights swaying over the skeletal frame of Bus 17. Every discovery told her the same story. Whoever sealed that door had done so intentionally, and someone, long ago, had tried to keep their voices buried. She clicked on the recorder's corroded play button, once, gently. Static filled the room, dry, grainy, endless. Then, through the hiss, something flickered for half a second. A faint hum, a sound like a child laughing, distant, distorted, and gone. She froze. The tape still held something. As the sound faded, Aria looked through the office window at the excavation site below. The floodlights glowed across the lake bed, illuminating the skeleton of the bus now fully unearthed. The air felt heavier, charged. Tomorrow, the forensics team would extract the tape. Tomorrow, they'd finally listen to what the bus had been holding all these years. But for now, in the dim light of the field office, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic static, like the bus was still trying to speak. And somewhere, between the noise and the silence, the truth waited. The lab played the tape for the first time in nearly 40 years inside a soundproof room at the West Haven field office. Detective Aria Lowe stood behind the glass, her arms crossed, every muscle drawn tight. The air hummed with low static as the technician carefully threaded the fragile cassette into a digital deck. The room went silent, a single click, then hiss. For the first few seconds, it was only white noise, grainy, shallow, like wind moving through a tunnel. Then came faint laughter, children's voices, 15 of them, bright and layered, echoing through the mechanical rattle of the bus. One boy shouted something about beating the rain. Another said, "We're almost there." Then, somewhere in the background, a woman's voice, calm, composed, probably the teacher, asking them to settle down. For a moment, it felt like a recording of life, frozen mid-motion. Then the sound shifted, the laughter broke, tyres screeched. A metallic thud hit close to the microphone. The teacher's voice rose, sharp now, commanding, but her words were lost in distortion. More chaos, a sound like doors rattling, a window cracking. Then the recording warped again. A man's voice entered, deep, steady, unnervingly calm. "Everyone, stay still." The sentence carried weight, the tone neither frantic nor cruel, just controlled. And then a small intake of breath, like someone trying not to cry. A long silence followed, punctuated by faint breathing. Somewhere far away, the hum of an engine idled and died. Then the tape clicked off. The technician stopped the playback. The room stayed quiet. Aria stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on the recorder. "Can you isolate that male voice?" she asked. The technician nodded, rewound the tape, and ran a voice filter. The screen displayed spectral patterns, thin blue and yellow lines crawling across black. The man's voice returned, distorted but measurable. The analyst pulled up an archival file from the Sheriff's Department database, a recording of a 1986 press briefing made days after the disappearance. Sheriff Colmeren's voice filled the speakers. Aria froze. The rhythm was the same, the drawl, the faint rasp on the final syllables, the same tone she'd heard dozens of times on old tapes and documentaries. Overlay them, she said quietly. When the analyst did, the waveforms aligned almost perfectly. Arya stepped out into the hallway. The air felt colder, heavier. She could still hear the words, "Everyone, stay still." Outside, night had settled over the excavation site. The lights glowed dimly through the office windows, casting long shadows across the dried lake bed. Arya leaned against the wall, trying to fit the pieces together. Sheriff Merrin had led the original search. He'd declared the case an accident. He'd sealed the files himself. And now, nearly 40 years later, his voice had reappeared from inside the buried bus. It didn't make sense, unless the sheriff had been there. She returned to the lab. "Run a check," she told the analyst. "Any mention of additional tapes in the original inventory?" The analyst typed quickly, pulling up the 1986 evidence manifest. Line 47 caught his eye. "Audio cassette, bus 17, copy B." Arya frowned. "There was a second tape." He nodded. "Recorded from the second recorder installed near the driver's seat. Both were logged the week after the disappearance." She leaned closer. "Where is it now?" He hesitated, scrolling, then stopped. "Record shows it was checked out in 1993 by Cole Merrin." Arya's expression didn't change, but her voice tightened. "Returned?" The analyst shook his head. "Never." Arya stepped back, thoughts colliding in silence. 1993, 7 years after the case was officially closed. Merrin had retired the following year, moved out of West Haven, and died in 2008. But if he'd taken the second tape, what was he protecting? She looked again at the digital copy of the first recording. The children's laughter still lingered faintly at the start, bright and alive before it vanished into fear. There had been 2 recorders, which meant 2 perspectives, 2 timelines. The missing tape might hold the rest of the story, the reason they never came home. That night, Arya drove past Merrin's old house on the edge of town. It was abandoned now, windows boarded, ivy crawling up the walls. A for sale sign leaned sideways in the dirt. The place looked forgotten, like the man himself. But she couldn't shake the thought that somewhere, inside those walls, a dusty cassette still waited. As she parked beneath the flickering streetlight, thunder rolled in the distance. Rain was finally coming to West Haven. The lake would rise again soon, burying the bus forever. If she was going to find the second tape, she had to move fast. Inside her car, Arya replayed the recording one last time. The final words repeated in her mind. "Everyone, stay still." Maybe it wasn't an order. Maybe it was a warning. Either way, the man who spoke them wasn't gone. Not yet. His truth was still somewhere in West Haven, waiting to be unearthed, just like the bus. And by the sound of that missing tape, the real story had only begun to surface. Rain pressed against the window of a pale blue house at the far edge of West Haven. The wind bent the overgrown hedges along the porch, rattling the loose screen door. Detective Arya Lowe parked beneath the oak tree, the wipers clicking in rhythm to the storm. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and medicine. The widow of Sheriff Cole Merrin sat in a rocking chair, a wool blanket folded across her knees. Her name was June Merrin. 81, sharp-eyed despite her frail frame. Arya introduced herself softly, setting her badge on the coffee table. "I'm reopening the bus 17 case, Mrs. Merrin. I think your husband might have known more than what made it into the reports." June didn't look surprised. She just sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of a chipped teacup. "You people always come back to that bus," she murmured, "even when there's nothing left to find." Arya waited. Silence was its own kind of invitation. After a long pause, June leaned forward. "He used to wake up at night. Phone ringing. Always after midnight. I'd hear him whispering from the kitchen, like he didn't want me to know who he was talking to." "Do you remember what he said?" Arya asked. "Bits and pieces," June said. "Something about the bridge site and a truck that wasn't supposed to be there." She hesitated, eyes clouding. "Then, one night, he came home with a jacket, mud all over it, smelled like diesel and lake water. He burned it out back. Said it was ruined." Arya's pen stopped moving. "When was this?" "Spring of '86, June whispered, 2 days after the children vanished. The rain deepened, echoing through the tin roof. June reached into a small tin box beside her chair, fumbling with old photographs and receipts, until she found a brass key attached to a cracked leather tag. "He made me promise not to open it," she said. "Said it was better if it stayed forgotten." "What does it open?" June looked up. "A storage unit. Highway 7, near the old rail yard. He stopped paying for it after he got sick, but they never cleared it out. The key's been sitting there ever since." By nightfall, Aria stood beneath the flickering fluorescent lights of West Haven Lock and Store. The storm had eased into a mist, and puddles reflected the harsh white glow of the security lamps. Unit number 47 creaked as she turned the key. The air inside was thick, the scent of mildew, rust, and something older. Boxes sagged with water damage, and folders lay scattered across the concrete floor. Aria stepped carefully, her flashlight beams slicing through the dark. Near the back wall, she found a bundle of rolled maps tied with twine. When she spread one out, it showed county survey routes, most crossed out in red ink. One circled area caught her attention. Hollow Bend Quarry, marked Restricted, 1986. Another box held a stack of photographs, grainy prints of the unfinished bridge that had once been the search's final clue. Some images were dated days before the field trip, others the morning after. In one photo, the same school bus could be seen crossing the narrow road toward the quarry. Time-stamped 8:46 a.m., her breath caught. The route had never gone near that area. Then, tucked behind a metal cabinet, she found a sealed envelope wrapped in plastic. On the front, Merrin's handwriting read, "Bus 17, do not open." Her gloved hands hesitated. The paper felt brittle, edges curled with damp. She opened it slowly, sliding out a stack of typed documents marked Confidential, County Transportation Authority. They were transfer orders. Rerouting the class's field trip 2 days before the disappearance, the signature at the bottom was unmistakable, Sheriff Cole Merrin. But the destination wasn't the geology site listed in the school itinerary. It redirected Bus 17 through a closed section of mining property, land seized years earlier for environmental containment. Aria stared at the papers, the rain still tapping faintly on the unit's roof. If the bus had been ordered there, it meant the detour wasn't accidental. Someone had planned it, and the man who led the investigation had signed the document himself. She gathered the evidence into a waterproof folder, sealing it shut. As she stepped out into the night, thunder rolled low over the fields. For the first time, the pieces began to connect. The late night calls, the burned jacket, the sealed files. Merrin hadn't been covering up an accident. He'd been protecting something buried deeper than the bus. Back in her car, Aria glanced at the key still resting on the passenger seat, its metal tag glinting faintly in the dashboard light. June had said Merrin received those calls from a restricted number, one tied to county administration. Someone else had been on the line that night, someone who knew where that bus was going. Aria turned the ignition. The rain intensified again, streaking the windshield. The investigation had officially crossed from tragedy into conspiracy. And somewhere in the county archives, buried under 4 decades of sealed paper, there would be proof of who made that call. That would be her next stop. The following morning, the rain had cleared, leaving behind a pale fog that hung low across the county line. Detective Aria Lowe drove toward the courthouse archives, her mind turning over the names stamped across the rerouting documents, Hollow Bend Mining and Resources. The company had gone bankrupt in 1988, but in 1986, the year Bus 17 vanished, it had owned nearly every acre of the land the class was sent through. Inside the records office, fluorescent lights flickered overhead as she scrolled through digital scans of old property records. The mining company's logo appeared again and again on government contracts, right beside the signature of a federal oversight agent later indicted for falsifying environmental reports. Then, in an old ledger of school transportation agreements, Aria found something worse. 2 corporate checks made out to the West Haven School Board. Both dated March 1986, both signed by Robert Halverson and James Keller. Hollow Bend executives and community donors. The timeline aligned too neatly. 2 days after the donations cleared, the route for Bus 17 changed. Aria exhaled, tapping her pen against the file. It wasn't just an accident of paperwork, it was a transaction. Over the next week, she conducted a string of interviews. The tone of her notes changed from procedural to personal, as though the case itself had begun to breathe again. A retired miner, his voice trembling with age, remembered trucks moving through Hollow Bend Quarry late at night. "We weren't supposed to ask questions," he said. "They said it was waste rock, but it stank like chemicals. We buried it deep, real deep." A former local journalist told her about a story he'd tried to publish in 1987, connecting Hollow Bend to illegal dumping. "The sheriff shut it down," he said flatly, "said it had caused panic. A week later, my notes were gone, and the paper ran a piece calling the company a community asset. And then there was the bus mechanic. His name was Earl Timmons, 79 now, living in a small trailer on the edge of town. He met Aria at dusk, outside a rusted service garage that smelled faintly of oil and rain. Earl's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. His eyes never quite met hers. "I worked maintenance for the district back then," he said. "Every bus that went out came through my bay at least once a month." Aria showed him a photo of Bus 17. Freshly unearthed, its doors twisted and sealed. "This one ever come through?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember that one. March or April of '86. Paint was fresh. Tyres still good." She leaned in. "Do you remember any special orders?" He hesitated. The cigarette burned halfway down before he spoke again. "They told me to reinforce the doors. Said it was for safety, to stop kids from leaning out while driving." Aria's brow furrowed. "Who told you?" Earl looked down. "Merrin's office called it in, but the man who brought the paperwork, he wasn't from the sheriff's department, wore a company badge. Hollow Bend." Earl nodded. "Yeah, they paid cash, and they said it had to be done that night." He stared at the photo again, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't question it, Detective. We welded the latches from the outside, both sides. Figured they'd grind them off later. Didn't think much of it." He took a long drag of his cigarette. "But when I saw that bus on the news the next week, I knew those kids never opened those doors." The words hung in the air. Aria felt the weight of them, the quiet horror settling between the rain and the fading daylight. "You're saying someone ordered the doors sealed before the trip?" Earl nodded. "Under orders," he repeated. "I did what I was told." She asked for a name, but he only shook his head. "He's gone now. Died in an accident the year after. Name started with an H. Halverson." Aria didn't say it aloud, but she didn't need to. The connection was there, a company under federal watch, a sheriff who sealed evidence, and a bus whose doors were welded shut before it ever left the lot. Later that night, Aria sat alone in her motel room, the case file open across the bed. The details aligned like a slow-moving pattern she couldn't unsee. 15 kids rerouted through company land, 2 executives buying silence, a sheriff caught in the middle, and a mechanic carrying 40 years of guilt. The walls hummed, with the faint sound of wind against the glass. She picked up her recorder and spoke quietly, almost to herself. "If the route was deliberate," she said, "then the bus was never meant to come back." Her eyes drifted toward the window, where rain began to fall again. Light, hesitant, like memory returning. Tomorrow, she'd visit Hollow Bend itself. The quarry was still there, fenced and forgotten, just beyond the stretch of road where Bus 17 vanished. If the truth was buried anywhere, it would be there. And whatever they'd been dumping in those pits might still be seeping beneath the ground. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. It fell in long, steady sheets across West Haven, turning the roads into rivers and the air into fog. Inside the State Forensics Lab, Detective Aria Lowe stood beside a technician hunched over a restoration console, a single cassette spinning slowly under glass. The label, nearly erased by time, still showed one faint line of writing. Copy B, April 12th, 1886. This was the missing tape, the one Sheriff Merrin had taken in 1993 and hidden among his belongings. The room was silent except for the rhythmic tick of the machine as it cleaned decades of grime from the fragile magnetic ribbon. Then a soft hum filled the air. The first recovered sound. A voice, cracked and uneven, broke through. It was Merrin. "They saw the barrels," he whispered. "They weren't supposed to." Arya froze. The words sounded raw, not the confident voice from televised briefings, but a man cornered by the truth. The tape hissed again, distorted by age. Then came faint background noises, rushing water, metal creaking, muffled shouts. Merrin's voice returned, shaking. "I told them to stay calm. I told them we'd get help. They were scared. The teacher, she begged me not to leave." A pause. Then the slow scrape of movement, maybe the bus door being forced shut. "We didn't mean for it to happen this way," Merrin continued, voice breaking. "They saw the barrels. We couldn't let anyone see. Not out there." The technician glanced at Arya, his hands stilling the machine. "Should I stop?" he asked. She shook her head. "Keep going." The tape clicked and hissed again. A faint rumble bled through the static. Thunder, maybe, or a collapsing structure. Merrin coughed, then spoke again, quieter now, as if recording in secret. "They were supposed to be moved. Just until morning." That's what Halverson said. "We'd come back once the storm passed. But the rain came early. The bridge was gone." His breathing turned shallow. "The quarry flooded fast. I saw the headlights go under. Couldn't stop it. The bus slipped in. Just gone." A hollow silence followed, the sound of a man realizing what he couldn't undo. Then, almost in prayer, "God forgive me." I tried to keep it quiet. Told the parents it was an accident. Told the papers they never found it. But every night, I still hear the water. Arya felt her chest tighten. The recording wasn't just a confession, it was a burial. The tape stuttered again, then picked up fragments, Merrin muttering names, the teacher, the driver, one of the children. His voice trembled as he mentioned waste barrels and federal men. He spoke about sealing the doors himself, believing it was temporary. "We had to hide the barrels," he said again. "Kids weren't supposed to be there." They saw too much. The rain outside struck the windows, harder now, echoing the storm Merrin described. And then came the final sound. Faint but unmistakable. A deep rumble, like water rushing against metal, followed by a long, distant crack of thunder. The tape ended there. The technician stopped the reel and exhaled, as though surfacing from underwater. Arya stared at the screen, the spectrogram still glowing faintly with Merrin's final words. It was over. 40 years of rumours reduced to one trembling confession. But it wasn't closure. It was something worse. Understanding. Merrin hadn't been a villain. Not entirely. He'd been a man tangled between orders, guilt and consequence. He'd buried a crime under official language, hoping time would finish the cover-up. He couldn't. Arya sat down, pressing her palms to her temples. The tape's last sound replayed in her mind. That single crack of thunder. Outside, real thunder rolled across the hills of West Haven, shaking the lab windows. The storm was returning, just as it had that night in 1986. She turned to the technician. "Make 3 copies," she said quietly, "and seal the original." As she left the lab, her reflection caught briefly in the glass. Tired eyes, rain-streaked jacket, the faint flicker of lightning behind her. The second tape had finally spoken, but one truth still waited. What exactly was buried beneath those flooded quarry grounds? And if the storm kept rising, it wouldn't stay buried for long. Arya looked toward the darkening sky. The thunder rolled again, almost perfectly echoing the tape's final sound. The past was breaking its silence, and she was running out of time. The sky over West Haven was a pale grey canvas, the kind that holds its breath before a storm. Along the cracked shoreline of Lake Keegan, people gathered in silence. Parents, siblings, a few surviving teachers now stooped with age. The waterline had receded far enough to reveal what was once unthinkable. The top of a yellow bus, its frame rusted, windows hollow, a relic preserved in mud. Around it, Workers had erected a temporary fence draped with white ribbons and flowers, each one bearing a child's name. It was the first time in 39 years the family stood together, facing the truth instead of the waiting. Detective Aria Lowe stood at the back of the crowd, coat collar turned up against the cold breeze. She had spent months unravelling every secret, every redaction, every confession buried under official ink. Today, her task was to close it. A local pastor read from a weathered notebook, his voice trembling over the names, 15 students and 1 teacher. A choir of wind chimes hung from the nearby trees, their soft, uneven tones filling the pauses. No one cried loudly. The tears came quiet, like the rain that began to fall in faint, forgiving drops. Aria watched as Sheriff Merrin's widow placed a small photograph on the fence, an image of her husband in uniform, smiling, younger than the man who had recorded that last tape. No words were exchanged. No one blamed her. The silence itself became an act of mercy. When the ceremony ended, most people lingered by the bus. Journalists took distant shots. Children, too young to understand, laid wildflowers by the rusted wheels. Aria stayed until the crowd thinned to nothing but the sound of water lapping against the shore. The lake had already begun to rise again, slow but steady, swallowing the mud and the debris. Soon, the bus would sink beneath it once more, not as evidence, but as a memorial. She carried with her a single envelope, yellowed at the edges, addressed in faded blue ink. To myself, 1987, in case they're found. It was one of the few personal items recovered from the case file, written and mailed by one of the mothers long ago. Aria had held onto it for weeks, unable to open it until today. Now, sitting on the hood of her car overlooking the lake, she carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single folded page, the paper thin and soft from age. Her breath caught as she read the child's handwriting. "If you find us, tell Mom we weren't scared." Nothing more. No name, no date, just that one line. Aria closed her eyes, and for a moment the world fell still. She imagined the laughter on the bus that morning in 1986, the chatter about fossils and packed lunches, the teacher's gentle voice reminding them to stay seated, the hum of the road under the tyres, then the storm, the fear, the stillness, and now, after all those years, this quiet message, reaching across decades like a whisper through time. Back at her desk that evening, she filed her final report under the same case number, file number 247-86. The summary line read simply, "Accident born from silence." She didn't write about the barrels, or the cover-up, or the confessions. Those details belonged to the past, buried like the bus. What mattered now was what remained, the names, the truth, and the quiet peace that followed. She turned off the desk lamp. Outside her window, the rain grew heavier, blurring the outlines of the town. Headlights reflected in puddles where children once played, and for a brief instant she thought she saw the shimmer of something yellow beneath the water, or maybe just the memory of it. Aria stepped outside, letting the rain soak through her hair. The lake below was filling fast, ripples spreading where the bus had rested. By morning, the surface would be smooth again, the monument hidden under water, but not forgotten. She looked toward the faint lights across the shore, where candles still flickered in jars. For the first time since reopening the file, she felt the weight lift. Justice hadn't come in a courtroom. It had come here, in truth spoken aloud, in silence honoured, in a child's final note carried through years of waiting. As thunder rolled softly in the distance, Aria whispered to the lake, "She knows now." And the rain kept falling, sealing the water like a promise. That some truths, once uncovered, never truly sink again.